A former Navy SEAL walked into the silence after a brutal storm and found a wounded dog standing alone in the cold. The dog didn't run, didn't beg. It only stood there, as if protecting something more important than its own life. When the man looked closer, he saw the truth. Tiny puppies, not even its own, fighting to survive beneath its broken body. He tried to help, but the dog chose to stop him first, as if it had already lost too much to trust again. And in that frozen field, two souls who had both failed before were forced to face the same fear, being too late. What happened next wasn't just a rescue. It was the moment they both learned how to stay and how to heal. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers and keep these stories alive. The storm had passed, but it had not truly left. It lingered in the silence. Callum Reed stood at the edge of the field as if he had stepped into something unfinished, something that had paused mid-breath and was waiting for him to notice. He was 37, tall at around 6 feet, with a lean, hardened frame built not for display, but for endurance. His face was clean-shaven, revealing a square jaw and pronounced cheekbones that gave him a look of permanent resolve, even when he felt none. His dark brown hair was cut in a military style, slightly longer than regulation, and his skin carried the faint weathering of northern winters, pale beneath, but roughened by wind and cold. His gray-blue eyes moved constantly, scanning, measuring, never resting long enough to belong anywhere. He hadn't slept, not because of the storm, because of what came after it. Somewhere out in the stretch of broken land ahead, one of Gideon Hale's calves had gone missing. Gideon Hale was not the kind of man who asked for help easily. At 62, he carried the kind of strength that came from decades of working the same soil, the same fences, the same stubborn land that never gave anything without a fight. He stood a few yards behind Callum now, his broad shoulders wrapped in a weathered canvas coat the color of old bark, his gray hair cut short and uneven like he didn't care for mirrors. His face was lined deeply, not from age alone, but from squinting into sun, wind, and years that never paused long enough to soften a man. "I checked the north fence," Gideon had said earlier, his voice rough like gravel dragged across wood. "Tracks just disappear." Callum had nodded. Disappearing tracks didn't unsettle him. What unsettled him was when something remained. Now he stepped forward into the field. The ground shifted beneath his boots, mud layered under melting snow, each step pulling slightly, like the earth itself wanted to hold him back. The fence to his right leaned inward, snapped in 2 places. A piece of cloth hung from one broken post, fluttering weakly, as if even the wind had grown tired. He lowered his gaze. Tracks, not one set, too many. Hooves scattered and frantic, circling, overlapping, then breaking apart. Panic, frozen into the ground. Then nothing. Just blank stretches where snow had settled again, smoothing over whatever had happened. Callum moved slowly, following instinct rather than pattern. That was what had kept him alive before. That, and arriving in time. A memory brushed against him, sharp and unwanted. A door, half open. A voice calling his name. Too late. He exhaled through his nose and kept walking. Something ahead caught his eye. Not movement. Stillness. It was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't looking for what didn't belong. A stretch of flattened ground where the snow had not settled evenly. A long, shallow depression, as if something, or someone, had stayed there long enough to reshape the surface beneath it. Callum slowed. That wasn't from the storm. Storms scattered. They didn't linger. He took another step, and then he saw it. At first it was just a shape, low, still, part of the earth. Then it breathed. A German shepherd, male, large, black and tan, though the colors were dulled beneath layers of mud and dried blood. The dog lay in front of a small mound of hay, its body angled in a way that was not comfortable, not natural, more like a barrier than a resting position. It didn't bark. It didn't move away. It simply watched. Its eyes were dark amber, sharp despite exhaustion, tracking Callum with a focus that felt measured, not wild. Its ears were upright but slightly tilted back, signaling alertness without immediate aggression. Callum stopped. The dog's chest rose and fell slowly, too slowly. One shoulder, left, was stained darker. The fur matted where blood had dried and frozen into place. The wound wasn't fresh, but it wasn't healed either. The kind of injury that should have driven an animal to hide. Not this one. This one had chosen a position. Chosen to stay. Callum shifted his weight, just slightly. The dog reacted instantly. A low growl rolled out of its chest. Not loud, not frantic, but deep and controlled, like a warning that had already been decided. Callum froze. Behind him, Gideon stepped closer, boots crunching against frozen patches of ground. "What have you got?" he called out. Callum didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes on the dog. "Stay back," he said quietly. Gideon followed his gaze and went still. "Well, I'll be damned," Gideon muttered under his breath. "That's no stray." Callum didn't look back, but he knew Gideon was right. There was something about the dog's posture, the way it aligned itself with the wind, angling its body so the worst of it hit its injured side instead of whatever lay behind it. That wasn't instinct alone. That was training. Callum took a slow breath. "Easy," he murmured, his voice low, steady. "I'm not here to take anything." The dog's growl didn't stop, but it didn't escalate either. That mattered. Callum lowered himself slightly, not fully kneeling, just enough to shift his profile, less threat, less height. The dog's eyes flicked, reading him, calculating, not panicking. That was when something changed. The wind shifted. A sudden gust cut across the field, stronger than before, lifting loose strands of hay from the mound behind the dog, and in that brief, flickering moment, Callum heard it. A sound so faint it could have been mistaken for the wind. A thin, broken breath. He leaned just slightly to the side, careful not to advance. The dog's growl deepened, but it didn't lunge. It held, and then the hay shifted again. Enough for Callum to see. Small shapes, too small, 4 of them, puppies, German shepherds, but younger, far too young to be out here. Their fur was still soft, uneven in color, not yet settled into the distinct black and tan pattern of adulthood. One had more brown along the face, another darker along the back. None of them matched the male in front of them. They trembled, pressed together, their tiny bodies barely lifting with each breath. Callum felt something tighten in his chest. They weren't his. The dog shifted slightly, just enough to reposition its body. and Callum saw it clearly now. The injured shoulder, placed deliberately between the wind and the puppies, shielding them. Not himself, him. The realization landed quietly but heavily. This animal was not guarding its own survival. It was guarding theirs. Gideon let out a slow whistle behind him. "Damn fool thing," he said, though there was something softer in his tone now. Or maybe not a fool at all. Callum didn't respond. He couldn't take his eyes off the dog. There was no panic in it, no desperation, only decision. And that was what unsettled him most, because he had seen that look before. Not in animals, in men. Men who stayed behind. Men who chose to hold a line even when they knew no one was coming back for them. Callum swallowed, his throat dry despite the cold air. "Yeah," he said quietly, more to himself than to Gideon. "Not a fool." He took a half-step forward. The dog reacted instantly. The growl sharpened, louder now, its body tensing despite the visible strain it caused. The injured shoulder trembled under the pressure, but it didn't give. It held. Callum stopped again, and this time he understood something that made his heartbeat slow, not quicken. The dog wasn't warning him away out of fear. It was holding ground, out of purpose. Callum exhaled slowly, his breath forming a faint cloud in the cold air. "All right," he murmured. And for the first time since he had stepped into that field, he didn't feel like he was chasing something lost. He felt like he had found something that refused to be lost. Callum did not move forward. Not because he was afraid, but because something in him, older than instinct, quieter than fear, told him that one more step taken too soon could ruin everything. He lowered himself slowly, not fully kneeling, just enough to make himself smaller. Less of a threat. Less of a force pushing against what already stood its ground. "Easy," he said again, softer this time. "I'm not here to take anything." The German shepherd watched him. Not like an animal, like a sentry. Its breathing was uneven now, shallow but controlled, as if every inhale had to be rationed. The wound on its shoulder had stiffened, darkened where blood had dried into the fur. But there was no fresh bleeding. That meant time had passed. Hours, maybe longer. Still, it held position. Still, it did not retreat. The wind swept across the field again, colder this time, sharper, as if it had remembered its purpose. The dog shifted, not backward, not away, but slightly to the side, angling its body more deliberately. Its injured shoulder took the brunt of the wind, its torso creating a barrier that curved just enough to shield what lay behind. Callum noticed everything. The precision, the restraint, the fact that the dog did not waste movement. He had seen that before. Men who survived did not waste motion. Men who had been trained did not move unless there was a reason. Behind him, Gideon shifted his weight, boots pressing into the mud with a low suction sound. "That thing's going to drop if it keeps standing like that," Gideon muttered. His voice was quieter now, less sure than before. "You want me to grab the rifle?" "No," Callum said without turning. The answer came too quickly, too firmly. Gideon studied him for a moment, then nodded once, though Callum couldn't see it. "All right," he said. "But if it comes at you—" "It won't," Callum replied. He wasn't guessing, he was reading. The dog's eyes hadn't changed. No dilation, no frantic flicker. Just focus. Just decision. Callum shifted his weight slightly to the left, testing. The dog reacted instantly. Not with a charge, with alignment. It adjusted its stance, keeping itself squarely between him and the hay mound. That was when Callum understood something deeper. This wasn't fear-driven behavior. It wasn't panic. It was protection. He exhaled slowly, letting the cold air settle in his lungs. "All right," he murmured, almost to himself. "You're holding a line." The words felt strange leaving his mouth. He hadn't spoken like that in years, not since before. The wind picked up again, tearing loose strands of hay from the mound behind the dog. One strand lifted high enough to reveal movement. Not much, just enough. Callum leaned slightly, careful not to cross whatever invisible boundary the dog had drawn. There they were. 4 small bodies, pressed tightly together. Too small, too still. Their fur clung in damp clumps, not yet thick enough to repel the cold. Their ears were soft, not fully formed, folding awkwardly as they shifted weakly against one another. One of them let out a thin, broken sound, half a whine, half a breath, and then went quiet again. Callum's hand curled slowly into a fist. He didn't need to look twice to know. They didn't belong to the dog. The patterns were wrong, the proportions. Even the scent carried differently on the wind, faint, but enough for someone trained to notice. The shepherd shifted again, pressing its weight more firmly into the ground. Its injured shoulder trembled, not from fear, from strain. It was failing, and still it did not move. Callum felt something tighten in his chest, a familiar pressure, a memory that didn't need words to form, a hallway, a body on the floor, someone who had stayed where they didn't have to. He pushed the image down before it could take shape. Not now. Not here. Gideon stepped closer this time, stopping just behind Callum's right shoulder. "I've seen dogs guard livestock," Gideon said quietly, his voice lower than before. "Seen 'em stick around longer than they should." He paused, then added, "Never seen one do it like this." Callum nodded once. "Yeah," he said, "this isn't livestock." Gideon followed his gaze to the puppies, his expression shifting. The lines in his face deepened, not with age, but with understanding. "Well," he said after a moment, "that complicates things." Callum didn't respond. He was watching the dog, studying it. The fur along its back lifted slightly with each gust of wind, but its posture never broke. Its front legs were planted firmly, claws digging into the soft ground for stability. Its tail lay low, unmoving, conserving energy. It was holding, and it knew it couldn't hold forever. Callum shifted his weight again, this time lowering himself further until one knee hovered just above the ground. The dog's growl returned, not louder, but sharper. A warning, not a threat. Callum stopped immediately. "Okay," he said quietly. "That's your line." He glanced briefly at Gideon. "If I cross it, it reacts." Gideon frowned. "You talking about that dog like it's a man?" Callum's eyes didn't leave the shepherd. "It was trained by one," he said. The statement hung in the air. Neither of them argued it. The wind died down for a moment. A brief, unnatural stillness settled over the field, and in that silence, one of the puppies shifted, just slightly. Its small head lifted, wobbling as if the effort alone might be too much. Its mouth opened, not in a cry, but in a weak attempt at breath. Callum saw it, and something in him moved before he could stop it. He leaned forward, not enough to reach, just enough to close the distance. The dog reacted instantly. Its body surged forward, not fully lunging, but enough to force Callum back into stillness. The growl this time was different. Not just warning, urgency, a line drawn harder. Callum froze, and then, slowly, he leaned back. "I see them," he said, his voice steady again. "You don't have to prove it." The dog held his gaze. For a moment, just a moment, the growl softened. Not gone, but quieter. Callum exhaled. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. Behind him, Gideon shifted again. "You're losing time," the older man said, not unkindly. "Those pups, they're not going to last long out here." Callum knew that. He could see it. The shallow breathing, the way their bodies barely moved. The cold was already inside them, and the dog was the only thing keeping them alive. A sudden movement caught Callum's eye, not from the puppies, from the dog. The shepherd turned its head slightly, just slightly, away from Callum. Not toward Gideon, not toward the field, but toward the horizon. Its ears shifted. Its body remained in place, but its attention drifted. For one brief second, it looked like it was listening to something no one else could hear. Then it turned back, and when its eyes met Callum's again, something had changed. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. As if, in that quiet passing moment, it had decided something, and whatever it decided, it hadn't chosen to leave. The wind returned, weaker now, dragging cold across the field in uneven waves. Callum lowered himself fully this time, one knee pressing into the mud. The cold seeped through his pants instantly, but he didn't move. He needed the dog to see him stay, not approach, not retreat. Stay. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time stretched differently out here. The dog watched him. Callum watched the dog. Neither of them blinked first. Behind them, the world remained broken. Fences down, tracks lost, the storm's aftermath scattered across the land. But here, in this small circle of ground, something else existed. A standstill. A decision waiting to be made. Callum slowly extended his hand. Not toward the dog, not toward the puppies, just forward, open, empty. "I'm not here to take them from you," he said quietly. The words felt strange. He wasn't sure who he was convincing. The dog didn't move, but it didn't growl. The silence stretched again, and in that silence, Callum felt something he hadn't allowed himself in a long time. Not certainty, not control. Something smaller, something fragile. A chance. Gideon Hale had seen many kinds of animals in his life. Cattle that refused to move even when fire crept toward them. Horses that would run straight through a storm, as if chasing something they could not name. Dogs that guarded fences out of habit, not loyalty. But this was something else. He stopped a few paces behind Callum, boots sinking slightly into the softened ground, his weathered coat shifting with the wind. His thick hands hung at his sides, fingers curled loosely, as if unsure whether to act or simply witness. "That's not a stray," Gideon said quietly, his voice no longer carrying the edge it had earlier. "That one's worked before." Callum didn't turn. He didn't need to. He already knew. The signs were too precise to ignore. The dog's paws were worn, but not unevenly. The calluses had formed in patterns that came from repetition, from drills, from terrain that demanded discipline rather than chaos. The neck bore a faint indentation beneath the fur, A pale line circling just enough to suggest a collar had once been there. Not decorative, not casual, but functional. Something that had held purpose. And then there was the way it moved. Or rather, the way it didn't. No wasted energy. No shifting out of discomfort. No instinctive retreat from pain. It remained exactly where it needed to be. Callum lowered his gaze slightly, studying the dog's stance again. The injured shoulder dipped under its weight, trembling now with a strain it could no longer hide. But the rest of its body compensated, adjusting subtly, redistributing pressure without breaking form. Training, not just basic obedience, field work. The kind that stayed with you long after commands stopped being spoken. Callum's jaw tightened. "Yeah," he said under his breath. "It's not lost." Gideon frowned slightly. "Looks pretty damn lost to me." Callum shook his head, just once. "No," he replied. "It knows exactly where it is." The words lingered between them. Gideon studied the animal again, longer this time, his expression shifting from skepticism to something quieter. Recognition, maybe. Or respect. "Well," he said eventually, "then it chose to stay." Callum didn't answer. Because that was the part that mattered. Not where the dog came from, but what it had decided to do after. The wind brushed across the field again, softer now, dragging the scent of damp earth and something older. Something faint, but unmistakable. Callum's eyes narrowed slightly. Blood. Not fresh. Faint. Scattered. He shifted his position just enough to change the angle of his view, scanning the ground beyond the haymound. There. A disturbance. Not the frantic chaos of hooves. Something else. A drag mark. Faint. Partially covered by melting snow, but still visible if you knew what to look for. It led away from the hay, cutting diagonally across the field toward a patch of broken fence near the tree line. Callum followed it with his eyes. Then he looked back at the dog. The shepherd didn't move. Didn't glance toward the trail. Didn't acknowledge it at all, which meant one thing. It already knew. Callum's chest tightened slightly. "Gideon," he said quietly. "You see that line out there?" Gideon squinted, stepping forward just enough to follow Callum's gaze. "Yeah, looks like something got dragged." Callum nodded once. Something didn't make it. Gideon exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand along his jaw. "Calf, maybe?" Callum didn't answer. His eyes had returned to the dog, because the dog hadn't reacted. Not to the scent, not to the implication. It had already processed that loss, and chosen something else. Callum shifted his weight again, slower this time, testing a different angle. The dog adjusted, just as before, maintaining its barrier. But there was something else now, a flicker. A hesitation so slight it could have been missed. Callum caught it, not in the body, in the eyes. For a fraction of a second, the dog's gaze moved, not away, not distracted, but inward, as if measuring something beyond the immediate moment. Callum had seen that too. Men making decisions that had nothing to do with orders. Something deeper, something final. He swallowed, the cold air catching slightly in his throat. "Who trained you?" he murmured, almost without meaning to. The dog didn't react to the words, but its ears shifted slightly, catching the tone. That was enough. Behind them, the sound of an engine broke the quiet. Low at first, then growing louder as it approached along the dirt path that cut through the edge of the property. Gideon turned his head. "Probably Boone," he said. The vehicle came into view a moment later. A state ranger truck, dark green with a thin stripe along the side, mud splattered up to the doors. It slowed as it approached the broken fence, then came to a stop. The door opened. A man stepped out. Ranger Elias Boone. He was in his mid-40s, built solid rather than tall, his posture straight in a way that spoke more of habit than effort. His hair was a muted brown, touched with gray at the temples, cut short and practical. His face was clean-shaven, but the lines around his eyes were deep, carved by years of scanning distances and reading terrain. There was no softness in his expression, but there was no cruelty either. Just a measured neutrality that came from dealing with too many situations that could go either way. He adjusted the radio, clipped to his shoulder, eyes moving immediately to the scene in front of him. "What have we got?" he asked, his voice calm, even. Gideon gestured toward the haymound. "You're going to want to see this." Boone stepped closer, boots steady, gaze shifting from Callum to the dog, then to the barely visible movement behind it. He stopped. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Well," he said after a moment. "That explains the call." Callum glanced at him. "You got a report?" Boone nodded once. "Neighbor down the road said they saw something moving out here after the storm. Thought it might have been a stray pack." He tilted his head slightly. "Doesn't look like a pack to me." "No," Callum said quietly. "It's not." Boone studied the dog more closely now, his gaze sharpening as he took in the details. The stance, the restraint, the wound. "That dog's trained," he said. Gideon let out a quiet breath. "That's what I said." Boone crouched slightly, not approaching too close, just enough to lower his profile. "Military, maybe," he added, "or search and rescue." Callum's eyes flicked to him. "Military," he said. Boone glanced at him. "You sure?" Callum nodded once. "Yeah." Boone didn't ask how he knew. He didn't need to. Instead, he shifted his attention back to the situation. "Those pups aren't going to last long," he said, his tone still even, but firmer now. "We need to get them out of there." The words hung in the air, simple, logical, necessary. The dog's growl returned, not louder but sharper. Callum felt it more than he heard it. Boone straightened slightly. "All right," he said calmly. "That answers that." He reached for the side of his belt where a tranquilizer kit was clipped. Callum's voice cut in immediately. "No." Boone paused, glancing at him. "No?" he repeated. Callum shook his head. "Not yet." Boone studied him for a moment, weighing something. "This isn't about preference," he said. "Those animals are dying." "I know," Callum replied. Then, "If you push him now," Callum said, his voice still low but carrying a quiet certainty, "you'll lose all of them." Boone's jaw tightened slightly. "You're making a call based on what?" Callum didn't look at him. "Behavior," he said. "Pattern. He's holding, not attacking. That means he's thinking." Boone frowned. "It's a dog." Callum's eyes shifted, finally meeting his. "So were the ones that saved men I knew." The silence that followed wasn't long, but it was enough. Boone exhaled slowly, his gaze returning to the shepherd. The smallest of the puppies stirred again. This time it didn't just lift its head. It tried to move. One weak, unsteady push of its front legs, as if it were trying to crawl towards something it couldn't see. It didn't make it far. Its body faltered, collapsing softly against the others. But in that brief, fragile attempt, the shepherd reacted. Not with aggression, not with defense, but with something else. It lowered its head, just slightly, and for the first time, it nudged one of the puppies, gently, carefully, as if reminding it, not yet. Stay. Callum felt something shift inside him, not memory, not pain. Something quieter. Recognition. Boone saw it too. The movement, the control. And something in his posture changed, just slightly. "All right," he said after a moment. "We wait." Gideon glanced between them. Wait for what? Callum didn't answer right away. He was watching the dog, watching the way it settled again, returning to its position, but with a subtle difference now. Not weaker, just adjusted, like it had accounted for something. "Trust," Callum said finally. Gideon snorted softly. "That's a hell of a thing to gamble on." Callum didn't disagree. He just stayed where he was, because, for the first time in a long while, he wasn't trying to outrun a moment. He was letting it unfold. And the dog was still holding the line. Callum moved, just one step. Not rushed, not forced. A measured shift forward. The kind of movement that carried intention without aggression. His boot pressed into the wet ground, sinking slightly as the weight transferred, and in that fraction of time, the world seemed to narrow into a single, fragile thread. The dog reacted. Not like an animal startled, like a line being crossed. The German shepherd surged forward, fast despite the strain in its body, closing the distance in a controlled burst. Its movement wasn't chaotic. It didn't snap wildly or lunge for flesh. It drove toward him with its chest angled, using momentum to push, to force space, to reclaim the boundary that had been tested. Callum's instincts fired instantly. His right hand dropped to his side, fingers brushing the worn edge of his holster, the familiar shape grounding him in a way that had once meant survival. But he didn't draw. He held. The dog stopped just short of contact, its body tense, breath heavy, a low, vibrating growl rolling from deep within its chest. Its injured shoulder dipped again, trembling visibly now, the strain undeniable. Behind him, Gideon's voice cut through the moment. "If it charges, drop it!" The words hit the air hard, sharp with urgency, shaped by a lifetime of decisions made quickly and lived with later. Callum didn't turn. He didn't answer. Because the truth was already there, standing in front of him. This wasn't a charge. It was a correction. The dog hadn't come for him. It had come to move him, to push him back into the place it had decided he belonged. Callum slowly shifted his weight backward, easing the pressure without breaking eye contact. The growl softened. Not gone, but less sharp. The line had been restored. For now. Callum's chest rose and fell slowly, controlled. But beneath that control, something older stirred. A memory that didn't belong to this field, this cold, this moment. A corridor filled with smoke. A body in the doorway. A hand that had tried to push him back. Too late. He blinked once, forcing the image away before it could take root. Not here. Not again. He exhaled slowly, his hand still resting near the holster, but no longer gripping it. "I hear you," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the weight behind it. I crossed it. The dog's ears flicked slightly. It didn't understand the words, but it understood the tone. And tone mattered. The shepherd stepped back half a pace, returning to its position in front of the hay mound. It didn't lie down this time. It remained standing, though the effort it took was clear in the way its muscles quivered beneath the mud-streaked fur. Ranger Boone watched the exchange closely, his posture still, his expression harder to read now. "That's not normal," he said after a moment, his voice lower than before. "No," Callum replied. "It's not." Boone shifted his stance, crossing his arms briefly before letting them fall again. He wasn't a man who liked uncertainty. That much was clear in the way his eyes kept scanning for variables, for control, for something he could act on. "We're running out of options," Boone said. "Those pups—" "I know," Callum cut in gently. Boone studied him. "Then what's your plan?" Callum didn't answer right away, because the truth was, there wasn't one. Not in the way Boone meant. There was no protocol for this, no clean solution that fit inside a report or a checklist. There was only timing and trust. Two things that didn't come with guarantees. Gideon shifted behind them, his patience thinning. "You keep waiting. We're going to be burying those pups," he said. "I've seen it before. Cold doesn't give second chances." Callum nodded once, acknowledging the truth in that. Cold didn't wait. Neither did regret. His gaze returned to the dog. It was still watching him, still holding, still choosing. And that was what made this different, because this wasn't a situation spiraling out of control. It was one being held together by something fragile, something that could snap if handled wrong. Callum lowered himself again, more deliberately this time, bringing both knees closer to the ground. The cold soaked through immediately, biting into him, but he welcomed it. Pain grounded you. Pain reminded you to stay present. "I'm going to try something," he said quietly. Boone frowned. "Try what?" Callum didn't look at him. "Not taking them," he said. "Not yet." Boone's jaw tightened. "That's not—" "I know what it's not," Callum said, still calm. "I also know what it is." He shifted slightly, reaching toward the side of his belt, not for a weapon, but for a small canteen clipped there. The metal was cold in his hand as he unscrewed the cap. The dog's eyes tracked the movement instantly. Its body tensed again. Callum froze halfway through the motion. "Easy," he murmured. He lifted the canteen slowly, tilting it just enough for a thin stream of water to spill onto the ground in front of him, darkening the mud. He didn't move closer, didn't offer it directly. Just let it be there. An option. The dog watched, didn't move. But the puppies behind it shifted weakly, one of them letting out a faint, broken sound that barely carried on the wind. Callum felt it in his chest more than he heard it. Boone exhaled sharply. "This is a gamble." Callum nodded. "Yeah," he said. "It is." Silence stretched again. The wind slowed, then picked up, then slowed again, as if the world itself couldn't decide which way to lean. Time passed, measured not in seconds, but in breaths. The dog didn't approach the water, didn't acknowledge it at all, and yet it didn't reject it either. It simply held its position, waiting, watching. Then something unexpected happened. Not from the dog, from Callum. He shifted his weight forward again, but this time not toward the puppies, toward the ground. He slowly removed one glove, exposing his bare hand to the cold. The skin flushed almost instantly, the air biting into it with sharp, immediate intensity. Then, without a word, he pressed his hand flat against the frozen mud between them. Palm down, open, unprotected, not reaching, not offering, just there. A gesture with no command behind it, no control, only presence. The dog's gaze locked onto it, and for a moment that stretched longer than it should have, everything else seemed to fall away. Callum didn't move. The cold crept up his arm, numbing his fingers, stiffening them, but he held steady. He didn't know why he did it, only that it felt right, or maybe it felt necessary. The dog took a breath, then another. Its stance shifted, barely, but enough. Not forward, not back. A redistribution, a reconsideration. Callum saw it. Boone saw it too, though he said nothing this time. Gideon, for once, stayed quiet, because something was happening. Something that didn't belong to urgency or force. Something slower. Something that could be broken if anyone spoke too loudly. Callum's hand remained where it was, fingers now pale from the cold. "I'm not here to take your fight," he said quietly. "Just help you hold it." The words were barely more than a breath, but they carried, not in meaning, in intent. The dog's ears shifted again. Its eyes flicked from Callum's hand to his face, then back. Another breath. And then, the smallest movement. A step. Not toward him, not away, just a shift that broke the perfect line it had held since the beginning. Callum didn't react, didn't move, didn't even breathe differently. Because this was the moment everything could break, or change. Callum did not move when the moment opened. He felt it before he saw it, the slightest shift in the tension between them, like a thread pulled just enough to loosen, but not enough to break. The dog had altered its stance, not surrendering, not retreating, but making space where there had been none before. That was all, but it was enough. Callum kept his hand where it was for a few seconds longer, letting the cold bite deeper until his fingers dulled and his palm lost sensation. Only then did he slowly withdraw it, inch by inch, making sure the motion carried no urgency, no claim. The German shepherd watched. Its breathing had grown heavier now, chest expanding unevenly with each inhale. The injured shoulder trembled more visibly, fatigue settling into muscle and bone in ways no amount of training could fully resist. But it remained standing, still guarding, still choosing. Callum shifted his weight forward again, slower this time, his movements measured to the smallest degree. He lowered himself further, both knees now pressing fully into the mud, the cold seeping upward through his legs like a warning he refused to hear. "I know what it's like," he said quietly, voice barely louder than the wind. "To lose someone you were supposed to protect." The words came out without force, without expectation. He wasn't speaking to the dog, not entirely. The dog's ears flicked. Its gaze didn't soften, but it held. And holding, in this moment, meant everything. Behind him, Boone remained still, arms at his sides now, no longer reaching for tools or solutions. Gideon stood farther back, silent for once. The tension in his posture eased just enough to show that he understood something was unfolding that did not belong to force. Time stretched. The wind weakened, then returned in softer waves, brushing across the field instead of cutting through it. Clouds shifted slightly overhead, allowing a thin, pale light to break through for the first time since morning. Callum noticed the change, not because it mattered, but because the dog noticed it too. The shepherd adjusted again, angling its body differently, recalculating the direction of the cold air. Even now, Even exhausted, it prioritized the space behind it. Callum followed that angle with his eyes. The puppies lay where they had been, pressed together, their small bodies barely rising beneath damp fur. One twitched slightly. Another let out a faint, almost inaudible sound. And one didn't move at all. Callum's breath caught. He leaned forward just slightly, careful not to push too far, his focus narrowing onto the smallest of the four. Its chest wasn't rising. Or if it was too shallow to see. The world around him dimmed, not in light, in sound. For a brief moment, everything else fell away. He had seen this before, too many times. A body that should have been breathing, a moment that should not have been ending. His instincts surged. Every part of him wanted to move, to close the distance, to fix it before it became something permanent. But he didn't. He stayed. Because this time, he wasn't alone in the decision. The dog saw it too. Of course it did. The shepherd's head lowered slightly, its gaze shifting toward the smallest pup. Its breathing changed, quicker now, less controlled. The tension in its body sharpened, not outward, not defensive, but inward, focused, processing. Callum watched carefully. This wasn't panic. This was something else. The dog leaned back just enough to adjust its stance again. And then, for the first time since Callum had arrived, it stepped aside. Not fully, not abandoning its position. But enough. Enough to expose the smallest pup clearly. Enough to allow a path that hadn't existed before. Callum felt it immediately. The opening, small, fragile, temporary. He didn't rush it, didn't lunge. He shifted forward slowly, placing one hand down, then the other, lowering his body closer to the ground, reducing the distance inch by inch. The dog watched every movement. Its growl returned, but softer now, less of a warning, more of a reminder. Callum stopped when he reached the edge of that invisible boundary. He didn't cross it yet. He looked at the dog. The dog looked at him. And in that silence, something passed between them. Not trust, not forgiveness, something simpler. Permission. Callum exhaled slowly. "All right," he whispered. "Just one." He moved, slowly, deliberately. His hand reached toward the smallest pup, fingers hovering for a fraction of a second before making contact. The fur was colder than he expected. Damp. Too light. He slid his fingers gently beneath the tiny body, lifting just enough to feel. There. A faint movement. Weak. But there. Callum closed his eyes for a brief second, the tension in his chest easing just enough to breathe again. "Still here," he murmured. The dog's posture changed again, not relaxing, but shifting, its head lowered slightly, its gaze following Callum's hand, tracking every motion. It did not interfere. It did not stop him. Callum adjusted his grip, careful, precise, supporting the pup without lifting it fully away from the others. He could feel the cold radiating from its body, seeping into his skin. It needed warmth. Now. He glanced at the rest of the litter. They were no better. Time was not something they had. He looked back at the dog. "I need to move them," he said quietly. The words felt heavier than they should have, because this wasn't a request, and it wasn't a command. It was a risk. The dog held his gaze. Its ears shifted slightly. Its body tensed. But it didn't lunge, didn't block him. It stayed, watching. Then, without warning, the dog lowered itself, not fully to the ground, but enough. Its front legs bent, its chest dropping closer to the earth, the injured shoulder finally yielding to gravity. It did not collapse. It chose it. A controlled descent. And as it did, its body shifted just enough to expose all 4 pups completely, no longer shielding them. Not because it had stopped protecting, but because, for the first time, it was allowing someone else to. Callum felt the shift like a weight lifting and settling at the same time. He didn't waste it. He moved quickly now, but not roughly, not carelessly. Every motion was precise, guided by years of training that had nothing to do with animals and everything to do with fragility. He gathered the smallest pup first, cradling it against his chest, using his own body heat to shield it from the cold. Then another, and another, each one lighter than the last, each one colder than it should have been. Behind him, Boone stepped forward at last, his hesitation gone. "All right," he said, already pulling off his outer jacket. "We move them now." Gideon moved too, slower but steady, removing his gloves, preparing to help. The field, once frozen in stillness, came alive with motion, but controlled, careful. Callum glanced once more at the dog. The shepherd remained where it was, lowered now, breathing heavily, its strength clearly fading. But its eyes never left the pups, not even for a second. Callum adjusted his grip, securing the small body against him. "We've got them," he said quietly. The dog didn't respond. Not with movement, not with sound, but something in its gaze shifted, just slightly, as if it understood, and as if, for the first time since the storm, it believed it. The road back to Callum's cabin was not long, but it felt like crossing something invisible, a boundary between what had been held together by instinct and what would now have to survive by something else. Callum walked ahead, careful with every step, one arm cradling 2 of the puppies against his chest beneath his jacket. Their bodies were small, fragile, pressing faint warmth against him, but not enough. Not yet. He could feel how little strength they had left. Behind him, Boone carried the other 2, his movements efficient, but more cautious than before, as if he had learned something in the field that no manual had ever written down. Gideon followed slightly to the side, scanning the terrain, old instincts guiding his eyes for anything that might still be wrong in a place that looked calm. And behind all of them, the shepherd. It did not limp, not in the way a normal dog would. Its gait was uneven, yes, the injured shoulder dipping slightly with each step, but it compensated with a quiet discipline, refusing to let the weakness show as failure. It moved with intention, staying just far enough back to keep all of them in sight, never closing the distance too quickly, never falling too far behind, guarding, even now, when it no longer needed to. Callum noticed that. Of course he did. He noticed everything about the dog, the way it paused whenever one of the men shifted position, the way its eyes tracked the movement of the puppies, not the men, the way it never once looked away long enough to rest. They reached the cabin just before the light began to fade. It stood alone at the edge of a thin line of trees, weathered wood darkened by years of wind and snow. The roof sagged slightly in one corner, patched more than once, and the porch carried the marks of boots that had come and gone without ceremony. It was not a place built for comfort. It was a place built to endure. Callum stepped onto the porch and pushed the door open with his shoulder. Warm air met them, thin but present. Not enough to feel safe, but enough to matter. Inside, Boone said, already moving. Callum entered first, heading straight for the couch near the small iron stove. He knelt, carefully lowering the puppies onto a folded blanket he had grabbed from the chair earlier. Boone followed, placing the others beside them, his movements more careful now, more deliberate. Gideon stepped in last, shutting the door behind him with a heavy thud that sealed the cold outside. For a moment, no one spoke. They all watched. The puppies stirred weakly, small movements, faint sounds. Alive, but barely. Callum reached for another blanket, draping it gently over them, then moved to the stove, adding wood, adjusting the flame. His hands worked automatically, muscle memory guiding him through actions that needed no thought. Behind him, Boone crouched, checking one of the pups with a practiced eye. "They're hypothermic," he said quietly. "But not gone." Callum nodded. "Not yet." Gideon exhaled, rubbing his hands together near the stove. "You got anything for 'em? Milk, something?" "Not much," Callum replied, "but enough to start." He turned back toward the couch, and then he noticed the dog wasn't inside. Callum straightened slowly. The door was closed. The room was warm. The puppies were here. But the shepherd remained outside. Callum moved toward the door, his steps quiet, deliberate. He opened it just enough to look out. The dog stood on the edge of the porch, not trying to come in, not trying to leave, just there, watching. Its body was still angled slightly toward the field, as if part of it hadn't fully left yet. The wind brushed against its fur, lifting the damp strands along its back, but it didn't move. It waited. Callum studied it for a moment. "You can come in," he said quietly. The dog didn't respond, didn't even shift. Callum stepped aside, leaving the doorway open. An invitation. Not a command. Still, nothing. Behind him, Boone glanced up. "What's it doing?" Callum didn't turn. "Staying where it thinks it belongs," he said. Boone frowned slightly, then looked back at the puppies. That thing's going to collapse if it stays out there. Callum knew that. He stepped back inside, leaving the door open just a few inches, enough for the warmth to spill out, enough for the choice to exist. Then he returned to the couch. The smallest pup lay stiller than the others, its breathing shallow, uneven. Callum knelt beside it, sliding his fingers gently beneath its chest again, feeling for that faint rhythm. There, still there, barely. He exhaled slowly, then reached for a cloth, dipping it in warm water before gently pressing it against the pup's side. "Come on," he murmured. "Stay with me." Boone stood, moving toward the small cabinet near the sink. He opened it, scanning quickly. "You've got anything else?" he asked. Callum shook his head. "Not much." Boone nodded once, then pulled out a small kit from his jacket, setting it down on the table. "I've got some supplies. Not made for this, but it'll do." Gideon leaned against the wall, watching, his earlier impatience replaced by something quieter. Respect, maybe, or simply the understanding that this was no longer about livestock or loss. It was about survival. Time moved differently inside the cabin, measured in breaths, in small movements, in the slow return of warmth to bodies that had nearly lost it. A sudden sound broke the stillness, a soft, uneven whine. Not from the puppies, from outside. Callum's head snapped toward the door. The dog. He moved quickly this time, crossing the room in 3 steps and pulling the door open wider. The shepherd stood exactly where it had been. But something had changed. Its legs trembled, not from cold, from exhaustion. And for the first time, its eyes weren't scanning the field. They were fixed on the doorway, on the space inside, on the place where the puppies had been taken. Callum felt it then, not in his mind, in his chest. A pull, not toward danger, toward something else, something that felt like a question. Callum stepped back again, clearing the doorway completely. "Come on," he said, quieter now. "You don't have to stay out there." The dog shifted, just slightly. One paw lifted, then set back down. Its ears flicked, its body leaned forward, then stopped, as if something inside it resisted the motion. Callum didn't move, didn't call again. He just stood there, waiting. Behind him, one of the puppies let out a faint, broken sound. The shepherd reacted instantly. Its head turned sharply toward the noise, its body tensing again despite the visible fatigue. And then, it moved. 1 step, slow, unsteady, then another, crossing the threshold as if it were something heavier than wood and air. It entered the cabin. The warmth hit it immediately. Its body flinched slightly, not from discomfort, but from unfamiliarity. This was not where it had been. This was not where it had chosen to stand. But it kept moving, straight toward the couch, its gaze locked onto the puppies. It lowered itself beside them, carefully, painfully, the injured shoulder finally giving way as it settled onto the floor. It did not lie fully on its side. It positioned itself just enough to be close enough to feel, close enough to know. Callum watched in silence. The dog's breathing slowed, not steady, not safe, but slower. For the first time since he had seen it, it was not holding the line. It was resting, or trying to. Callum knelt beside it, keeping a careful distance, his movements slow enough not to startle. "You can stay," he said quietly. The dog didn't react, but it didn't rise either. Its eyes remained on the puppies, watching, always watching. That night, no one slept. Not really. Gideon took the chair near the door, arms folded, drifting in and out of a shallow rest that never fully claimed him. Boone sat at the table, going over notes he hadn't written, his eyes lifting every few minutes to check the room. Callum remained by the couch, and the dog did not close its eyes, not once. Every time one of the puppies shifted, its head lifted. Every time the fire crackled, its ears flicked. Every sound, every movement, it registered, as if sleep was something it had forgotten how to do. Callum noticed that too. Of course he did. He leaned back slightly, resting his head against the wall, his eyes heavy but open. "You don't trust it yet," he said quietly. "Not to the room, to the dog. You don't think it's real." The dog didn't respond, but its gaze shifted, just slightly, toward him, then back to the puppies. Callum nodded once. "Yeah," he murmured. "I get that." Because he did. More than he wanted to. Morning did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, like something unsure it was welcome. The first light slipped through the narrow window beside the stove, thin and pale, stretching across the wooden floor in quiet lines. The fire had burned low during the night, leaving behind a soft glow and the faint scent of smoke that clung to the cabin walls. Callum was already awake. He hadn't meant to fall asleep, but at some point, exhaustion had taken him in fragments, pulling him under just long enough to dull the edges of the night. Now, he sat upright against the wall, one arm resting across his knee, his eyes fixed on the couch. The puppies were still there, still breathing. That was enough. For now. Boone had left just before dawn, called away by something he hadn't explained. Gideon had gone shortly after, promising to return with supplies, his heavy boots echoing across the porch before fading into the distance. That left only Callum and the dog. The German shepherd had not moved much during the night. It lay beside the couch, its body curved just enough to remain close without pressing too hard against the fragile bodies it guarded. Its breathing was slower now, deeper, but not fully steady. Every few minutes, its head would lift slightly, its ears adjusting, scanning for something unseen. Hyper-vigilance. Callum recognized it immediately. He had lived in that state once, long after the missions ended, long after the noise stopped. The dog wasn't resting, it was waiting for something to go wrong. Callum leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his thighs. His gaze moved from the dog to the smallest of the puppies, the weakest one. It lay closer to the edge of the blanket, its tiny chest rising unevenly, the rhythm fragile, inconsistent. Its fur had begun to dry, but it still lacked warmth, still lacked strength. Callum watched it carefully, too carefully, because this was where it always began, the doubt, the hesitation, the moment where instinct collided with memory. He reached out slowly, his hand hovering just above the puppy. The dog's reaction was immediate, not violent, not explosive, but precise. Its head snapped toward him, its body tensing in a way that sent a quiet warning through the room. A low sound escaped its throat, not loud enough to echo, but enough to be felt. Callum didn't pull back. He didn't push forward either. He held. The dog's eyes locked onto his hand. Not the puppy, not the room, just his hand, watching, measuring, deciding. Then, the dog moved. Quick, controlled. Its jaws closed gently around Callum's wrist, not biting, not breaking skin, but firm enough to stop him. Callum exhaled slowly. "Not yet," he murmured. The dog released him almost immediately, pulling back just enough to reestablish the space it needed. Callum lowered his hand. He didn't argue, didn't force it. He simply nodded once, as if acknowledging something unspoken. "Okay," he said quietly. "Your call." The dog's posture eased slightly, not relaxed, but less rigid. Callum leaned back again, his eyes returning to the puppy. He waited, not because he didn't want to act, but because he understood something now. This wasn't about control, it was about timing, and timing was something he had gotten wrong before. The hours passed quietly. The light shifted slowly across the floor, stretching further into the room, warming the space in ways the fire could not. Callum moved only when necessary. He added wood to the stove, adjusted the blankets, checked the puppies from a distance, and always, he watched the dog. The shepherd remained alert, but the intensity had changed. It no longer reacted to every small movement. It no longer guarded with the same rigid precision. It was adjusting, learning, or maybe allowing. It happened without warning. The smallest puppy's breathing faltered, not gradually, not subtly. One moment, It was there, weak but present. The next, it wasn't. Callum felt it before he saw it. That absence, that silence. His body reacted instantly, every instinct surging forward, pushing him toward action. His hand moved, faster this time, without hesitation, without waiting. He crossed the space, and this time, the dog didn't stop him. Callum dropped to his knees beside the couch, his hands already moving as he lifted the tiny body, cradling it carefully but firmly. It was colder than before, too cold. "No," he whispered, his voice tight, controlled but breaking at the edges. Not this time. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Not this time. The dog rose beside him, its body tense, but it did not interfere. It watched, close, every movement. Callum adjusted his grip, supporting the puppy's chest, using his thumb to gently stimulate its side, encouraging breath, encouraging life. "Come on," he murmured. "Stay with me." Nothing. For a second, nothing. The room held its breath. Then, a faint twitch. So small it could have been imagined, but Callum felt it. "Yeah," he said, softer now. "That's it," he continued, steady, careful, not rushing, not forcing. Another breath, weak, but real. Callum exhaled sharply, the tension in his chest releasing just enough to keep going. "I've got you," he said quietly. The dog moved closer, not blocking, not correcting, just there. Its head lowered, its nose hovering just inches from the puppy, its breath warm, steady, adding what little it could. Callum noticed that. Of course he did. He always noticed. And for the first time, he didn't feel alone in it. Minutes passed. The puppy's breathing stabilized slightly, still fragile, still uncertain, but no longer fading. Callum slowly lowered it back onto the blanket, adjusting the cloth around it, making sure it was as protected as possible. He sat back, his hands resting on his knees, his breathing uneven now, not from exertion, but from something deeper. Relief. And something else, something heavier. He glanced at the dog. The shepherd met his gaze, and in that moment, there was no warning, no tension, no distance, just acknowledgement. Not full trust, not yet, but enough. The days that followed were quiet, not easy, but steady. Callum didn't try to train the dog, didn't give commands, didn't attempt to control what wasn't his to control. He simply stayed. He fed the puppies, kept the fire going, moved carefully, spoke rarely, and the dog watched, learned, adjusted. There were moments of tension. Once, when Callum reached too quickly for one of the pups, the dog snapped again, sharp, controlled, a reminder that boundaries still existed. Callum didn't react, didn't pull away in anger. He simply slowed, and the dog allowed, bit by bit, moment by moment. The space between them changed. A few days later, the air felt different, warmer, not just from the fire, from something else. Callum woke early, the light already stronger now, stretching across the floor with a quiet confidence. He sat up slowly, his eyes moving instinctively toward the couch, and then he stopped. The dog wasn't where it had been. For a split second, tension returned, sharp and immediate. Then he saw it. The shepherd lay closer now, not at the edge, not guarding from a distance, but beside them. Its body stretched along the length of the blanket, its side pressed lightly against the puppy's, sharing warmth without force. One of the pups had climbed onto its back, its tiny body rising and falling with each breath, completely unaware of the weight it placed on something that had once refused even proximity. The dog didn't move, didn't correct, didn't resist. Its eyes were open, watching. Not the door, not the window. Callum. Their gaze met, and something passed between them. No sound, no gesture, just understanding. Callum didn't speak, didn't move. He simply nodded once. The dog blinked, slowly. And then, for the first time, it closed its eyes, not for a second, not in a flicker, but fully, deeply, as if something inside it had finally been set down. Callum stood later that morning on the porch, the cold no longer cutting as sharply as before. The field stretched out in front of him, quiet now, the scars of the storm still visible, but no longer raw. The wind moved gently across the land, carrying nothing urgent with it. Just air, just space, just time. He rested his hands against the railing, his posture relaxed in a way it hadn't been in years. Behind him, inside the cabin, there was movement, soft, alive, safe. He didn't turn. He didn't need to, because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't waiting for something to go wrong. He wasn't bracing. He wasn't counting seconds. He simply stood and stayed. Because sometimes, it wasn't about being the one who saved. It was about being the one who didn't leave. There are moments in life when we believe strength means holding on, standing guard, refusing to rest, carrying everything alone because we fear that if we let go, everything behind us will be lost. But sometimes, the real miracle is not in the fight. It is in the moment we are finally allowed to rest. That wounded canine did not protect those puppies because they shared its blood. It stayed because it made a choice to not let another life be lost the way something once had been lost for it. And Callum, a man shaped by the pain of arriving too late, learned something he had not allowed himself to believe. That being there, truly being there, can be enough. God does not always remove the storm from our lives. He does not always prevent the pain, or the loss, or the moments that break us. But often, He sends someone into that storm. Someone who will stay. Someone who will not turn away. Someone who will stand in the cold and choose compassion when it would be easier to walk on. And sometimes, that someone is not perfect. Sometimes, it is someone who has failed before. Someone who still carries regret. Someone who is learning, one moment at a time, how to stay when it matters most. In our everyday lives, we may never face a battlefield, but we are given the same quiet choices every day. To ignore or to notice, to leave or to stay, to protect or to walk away. Maybe the miracle is not something loud or visible. Maybe it is simply this: a heart that chooses not to abandon. If this story touched something in you, share it with someone who may need a reminder that they are not alone. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from, so we can connect across the miles. And if you believe in stories that heal, that restore, that remind us of what truly matters, consider subscribing to the channel to be part of this journey. May God bless you, protect your loved ones, and give you the strength to stay when it matters most.